There are moments in life when everything feels suspended, as if reality itself is holding its breath. This is one of those moments, not because something dramatic has happened, but because something subtle is shifting beneath the surface of your awareness. Your test begins now. Your timeline is being verified, and this is not a mystical punishment nor a cosmic judgment. It is a calibration. It is the quiet evaluation of coherence between who you say you want to become and who you have been rehearsing yourself to be every single day. For years, you may have tried to change your external circumstances, your finances, your relationships, your health, without fully understanding that reality is not merely something you experience, it is something you broadcast. As Dr. Joe Dispenza often explains, the brain is a record of the past, and if you wake up thinking the same thoughts and feeling the same emotions, you are continuing to signal the same electromagnetic signature into the field. In that sense, your timeline is not random. It is a predictable extension of your memorized emotional state. Many people carry a silent frustration. They meditate, they visualize, they repeat affirmations, and yet life appears unmoved. Beneath that frustration lies a deeper pain, the fear that perhaps they are not worthy, or that the universe has overlooked them. But the truth is more nuanced and far more empowering. The field does not respond to words, it responds to coherence. It responds to the alignment between thought and emotion, between intention and identity. This is why the idea that your timeline is being verified is so powerful. It suggests that reality is not fixed, but conditional. It adjusts according to the consistency of your internal state. When your thoughts declare abundance, but your body remains conditioned to stress and scarcity, the signal is fragmented, and fragmented signals do not produce stable outcomes. What you are about to understand is not a motivational promise, nor a vague spiritual reassurance. It is a framework rooted in neuroscience, consciousness studies, and emotional regulation. Your test is not about proving yourself to an external force. It is about becoming internally consistent enough that your future no longer contradicts your present identity. Right now, something is being measured, not by judgment, but by resonance. The question is not whether you desire change. The question is whether your nervous system, your habitual emotions, and your self-concept have truly shifted to support it. That is the threshold you are standing at. And this is where everything begins. There is a quiet discomfort that many people carry but rarely name. It is the sensation of living in repetition. Different year, same patterns. Different faces, same relational dynamics. New goals, familiar financial tension. The mind calls it bad luck or circumstance. Yet beneath the surface, there is a more intricate mechanism at work. What feels like fate is often frequency stabilized over time. When your timeline is being verified, what is truly being assessed is not your desire for change, but the stability of the signal you emit through your thoughts, emotions, and deeply memorized reactions. Bruce Lipton's work in epigenetics revealed something revolutionary. Genes are not rigid dictators of destiny. They are responders to environmental signals. But what is often overlooked is that your internal emotional environment is just as powerful as the external one. If your body has been conditioned to operate in stress, vigilance, or subtle disappointment, those biochemical states become familiar. The nervous system begins to prefer them. In that condition, even when you consciously intend abundance, the body resists it because it does not recognize it as safe. This is where many timelines quietly collapse before they ever fully emerge. The invisible fracture appears between what you think and what you feel. You may declare confidence while internally anticipating rejection. You may visualize prosperity while your chest tightens at the idea of risk. The body, which operates as a subconscious archive of past experiences, often overrides the mind's new declarations. In neurological terms, the neural circuits associated with past emotional memories fire automatically, reinforcing the same perception filters. The future is then interpreted through yesterday's lens, and what you call reality becomes a looped projection. What makes this process even more complex is the role of reward chemistry. Dopamine, often associated with motivation and anticipation, can subtly sabotage long-term transformation. When you fantasize about a future outcome without embodying the emotional stability required to sustain it, the brain may release small bursts of satisfaction simply from imagining it. This creates the illusion of progress. Yet imagination without physiological alignment does not recalibrate identity. The timeline shifts only when the body no longer reacts from the past. Joe Dispenza frequently speaks about coherence between the heart and the brain. This coherence is not poetic symbolism, it is measurable. When thoughts and emotions align in a regulated, elevated state, heart rate variability becomes harmonious and neural patterns synchronize. In that state, the signal you transmit is consistent. Consistency is what stabilizes new probabilities. Fragmentation, on the other hand, keeps possibilities unstable and short-lived. Consider how many times hope has been mistaken for embodiment. Hope is a mental orientation toward possibility. Embodiment is when your posture, breath, tone of voice, and baseline emotional state reflect the version of you who already lives that possibility. Your timeline does not respond to occasional inspiration. It responds to sustained identity. If your internal narrative still carries themes of struggle, sacrifice, or quiet resentment, those frequencies continue to authenticate a familiar future. There is also the deeper layer of narrative. Every person carries an internal story about who they are in the world. Some see themselves as survivors, others as overlooked contributors, others as perpetual learners who never quite arrive. These narratives operate beneath conscious awareness, shaping decisions, tolerances, and expectations. When your timeline is being verified, it is this narrative that is being measured against your declared desires. If the story has not evolved, the outcome rarely does. Think of frequency as a radio broadcast. You cannot tune into a new station while gripping the dial between two channels. Clarity requires commitment. The subtle trembling between old identity and new intention creates distortion, and distortion delays stabilization. The shift into a new timeline requires emotional familiarity with a different way of being. Not forced positivity, but regulated presence. Not exaggerated confidence, but grounded self-recognition. Your reality begins to reorganize when your internal state becomes less reactive and more deliberate. When stress is no longer your default baseline, perception widens. When resentment dissolves, opportunity becomes visible. When the body no longer expects disappointment, it stops scanning for it. At that moment, your timeline is not something you chase. It is something that naturally aligns with who you have become. There is a subtle tension that arises whenever change approaches. It does not always look like fear. Sometimes it looks like hesitation, overanalysis, or the sudden urge to delay. When a new possibility begins to form, the nervous system scans it not for potential, but for threat. This is where many timelines fracture. Not because the desire is weak, but because the identity remains anchored to what feels familiar. The body prefers the known, even when the known has been painful. Joe Dispenza often speaks about breaking the habit of being yourself. What he implies is deeper than personality adjustment. He refers to the neurological addiction to predictable emotional states. If you have spent years rehearsing worry, self-doubt, or guarded optimism, those states become chemically encoded. The brain fires in patterns that reinforce them, and the body follows with matching hormones. Over time, this loop becomes an identity. And identity, when left unquestioned, becomes destiny. This is why many individuals attempt to manifest a future that their nervous system has not yet learned to tolerate. Abundance can feel unsafe to someone accustomed to struggle. Intimacy can feel destabilizing to someone whose history has normalized emotional distance. Expansion can feel disorienting to someone whose self-concept has been built around limitation. The mind may welcome growth, but the body resists unfamiliar territory. And when the body resists, perception contracts. Carl Jung described the shadow as the part of ourselves that remains unintegrated. It contains suppressed emotions, denied impulses, and unexamined beliefs. When the shadow remains unseen, it quietly shapes behavior. In the context of manifestation, the shadow often holds the fears that contradict conscious intention. A person may consciously desire visibility while unconsciously fearing judgment. They may long for financial success while harboring guilt about surpassing family patterns. These internal contradictions dilute frequency. The verification of your timeline, then, is not about external signs appearing on cue. It is about internal alignment, stabilizing under pressure. When circumstances shift unexpectedly, the question becomes whether your emotional baseline collapses into old reactions or remains steady. Anxiety often signals attachment to controlling outcomes. Yet control is rooted in distrust. When the nervous system is regulated, presence replaces urgency. Clarity replaces compulsive forecasting. Spiritual performance complicates this further. Repeating elevated language without emotional embodiment creates a split between expression and experience. Words become decorative rather than transformative. The field does not respond to vocabulary, it responds to coherence. If affirmations are layered over unresolved resentment or unprocessed grief, the signal remains fragmented. Authentic recalibration requires emotional honesty, not theatrical positivity. There is also a paradox in silence. While many seek transformation through constant mental repetition, sustained internal quiet often generates deeper reorganization. In silence, automatic thought patterns surface without distraction. The observer becomes distinct from the reaction. Neural pathways associated with stress begin to weaken when not continuously reinforced. Over time, a new baseline forms, not through force, but through repetition of awareness. The identity that sustains a new timeline is not constructed through dramatic declarations. It is shaped through subtle consistency. The tone of your internal dialogue shifts. The way you interpret minor setbacks changes. The speed at which you return to equilibrium shortens. These micro-adjustments accumulate, and the nervous system gradually recognizes expansion as familiar rather than threatening. When your internal landscape stabilizes, the need to chase signs diminishes. External validation becomes secondary to internal coherence. The timeline adjusts not because it has been demanded, but because it has been matched. At that point, manifestation is no longer an act of reaching outward. It becomes the natural consequence of having reorganized inward. There are periods when life seems to unravel just as clarity begins to emerge. Plans shift unexpectedly. Relationships recalibrate. Opportunities dissolve before they fully materialize. In those moments, it is tempting to interpret disruption as failure. Yet disruption often signals reorganization. When a timeline begins to recalibrate, the structures that supported your former identity may no longer remain stable. What appears as loss can be the nervous system and environment adjusting to a new internal frequency. Tom Campbell's model of reality as consciousness-based suggests that physical experiences are feedback loops within a larger informational field. From this perspective, events are not random intrusions but responses to the quality of awareness being expressed. If your internal state has begun to shift, less reactive, more deliberate, your external experiences may reorganize to match that shift. The transition, however, is rarely seamless. The mind resists uncertainty because it interprets unpredictability as danger. Anxiety frequently surfaces at this threshold. It masquerades as responsibility, vigilance, or strategic planning, but beneath it lies attachment to outcome. When the mind clings to a specific timeline for events, it narrows perception. The body enters a mild stress response, subtly reinforcing the old emotional baseline. This is how the verification process can stall. Not because the future is inaccessible, but because urgency destabilizes coherence. There is a misconception that manifestation unfolds instantly once intention is declared. Yet neurobiology operates through repetition and reinforcement. Neural networks associated with new identity require sustained emotional rehearsal before they override older circuits. When discomfort arises during this transition, it does not indicate regression, it signals rewiring. Just as muscles tremble when adapting to new resistance, the psyche experiences instability while integrating expansion. The desire to control timing often reveals an unspoken fear that if outcomes are delayed, they may never arrive. This fear originates from past experiences where effort did not yield immediate reward. The brain catalogs those memories and anticipates repetition. In doing so, it unconsciously recreates similar emotional conditions. Patience in this context is not passive waiting. It is emotional regulation under uncertainty. It is the ability to remain internally steady, even when external confirmation is absent. There are subtle indicators that recalibration is underway. Heightened sensitivity to environments that once felt tolerable, a diminished tolerance for conversations rooted in complaint or limitation, an increasing awareness of internal dialogue. These shifts may feel isolating at first, because they alter relational dynamics, yet they reflect an emerging alignment between intention and identity. Consider the transformation of a caterpillar. The cocoon stage appears static from the outside, but internally dissolution occurs before reconstruction. Cells reorganize, old structures disassemble, and entirely new forms take shape. During this phase, instability is not malfunction, it is prerequisite. In much the same way, emotional turbulence can precede stabilization of a new timeline. When presence replaces compulsive forecasting, perception expands. Opportunities once overlooked become visible. Conversations align differently. Decisions feel less frantic. The nervous system begins to trust the unfolding rather than brace against it. This trust is not blind optimism, it is physiological coherence. Heart rhythms stabilize, breathing deepens, and cognitive flexibility increases. As coherence strengthens, the need to micromanage dissolves. There is an understanding that the timeline responds to identity, not to pressure. The future aligns with the version of you that remains emotionally consistent under challenge. When external chaos no longer triggers internal collapse, verification is nearly complete. At that stage, manifestation does not feel like effort. It feels like continuation. There is a profound difference between chasing a result and embodying a state. Many people spend years pursuing outcomes, financial stability, recognition, harmony in relationships, without realizing that outcomes are secondary reflections. The deeper architecture of reality forms around identity. When identity shifts, behavior adjusts subtly. When behavior adjusts, perception reorganizes. When perception reorganizes, opportunity becomes visible in places once ignored. This is how a timeline stabilizes, not through force but through congruence. Gregg Braden has often spoken about the measurable coherence between the human heart and the electromagnetic field surrounding the body. When heart rhythms become orderly and synchronized with cognitive intention, the body emits a stable signal. Stability, in energetic terms, is influence. Instability is noise. If your emotional state fluctuates wildly between inspiration and doubt, the signal disperses. When gratitude is genuine and not performative, when appreciation is felt somatically rather than declared verbally, neural pathways associated with stress begin to weaken. Over time, this reorganizes baseline perception. There is also the matter of subtle scarcity. Scarcity is not merely financial limitation, it is a perception filter shaped by past deprivation, comparison, or disappointment. Even when resources are present, the body may remain braced for loss. This bracing contracts creativity and narrows cognitive flexibility. The timeline then reflects cautious decisions, missed opportunities, and guarded interactions. Abundance, in contrast, is not reckless expansion. It is the internal recognition of sufficiency. From sufficiency arises measured risk, open communication, and receptive awareness. Presence plays a decisive role in this stabilization. Obsessive anticipation fragments attention. When the mind continuously leaps into imagined futures, it abandons the physiological regulation available in the present moment. The body remains in low-level activation, reinforcing tension. In contrast, sustained presence anchors awareness in sensory experience, breath, posture, tone. This grounding shifts neural firing patterns from reactive loops into integrative networks. The more frequently this state is accessed, the more familiar it becomes. Familiarity reduces resistance. Small behavioral cues also reinforce identity. The way you speak about your circumstances, the posture you carry when entering a room, the speed at which you respond to setbacks. These micro-expressions of identity signal to the nervous system whether you are still operating from defense or from grounded confidence. When they align with your intended future, they strengthen that probability. When they contradict it, they dilute it. There is wisdom in observing nature's pacing. Seasons do not accelerate because impatience arises. Roots deepen invisibly before branches extend outward. When transformation unfolds internally, there may be a period where external evidence is minimal, yet internal stability accumulates. Emotional reactivity decreases. Gratitude becomes less effortful and more reflexive. Decision-making becomes less frantic and more deliberate. These are indicators of coherence maturing. Financial shifts, relational improvements, and health recalibrations often follow this internal reorganization, not because they were demanded, but because they are congruent with the stabilized state. When scarcity dissolves internally, opportunities aligned with expansion become noticeable. When self-worth stabilizes, relational dynamics shift naturally. When stress responses diminish, physiological resilience increases. The verification of your timeline completes itself when internal consistency persists regardless of temporary disruption. External circumstances may fluctuate, but your baseline remains anchored. In that anchored state, you are no longer attempting to convince reality to change. You are reflecting a version of yourself that already belongs to a different trajectory. At this stage, manifestation is no longer mystical or abstract. It is structured coherence. Intention becomes effective because emotion supports it. Frequency becomes influential because it is steady. Your reality reorganizes not through demand, but through alignment sustained long enough to become your new normal. There comes a moment when seeking ends and embodiment begins. Throughout this journey, the central realization has remained consistent. Reality does not reorganize around wishful thinking. It reorganizes around stabilized identity. Your timeline has never been a distant script written beyond your reach. It has been a living extension of your dominant emotional patterns, your rehearsed thoughts, and the coherence or fragmentation between them. The verification was never about worthiness. It was about resonance. When the nervous system no longer defaults to fear, when the body is not addicted to familiar stress, when gratitude arises without performance, something measurable shifts. Neural circuits rewire, perception broadens, decisions become less reactive and more intentional. In that shift, the future stops feeling like something to chase and begins to feel like something natural. The field responds not to intensity, but to stability. You have seen how hidden narratives shape outcomes, how unconscious emotional memory can override conscious intention, and how coherence between heart and mind stabilizes probability. The test, then, is not imposed from outside. It is the quiet confirmation that your inner state matches your declared future. When identity evolves, timelines follow. Now consider this carefully. If your external world is a mirror of your most consistent internal state, what version of yourself have you truly been rehearsing every day? And more importantly, who are you becoming now? If this reflection resonated with you, subscribe to the channel so you can continue deepening this understanding of consciousness, identity, and manifestation. There is more unfolding beyond this moment. Continue watching the next video on your screen and explore how to stabilize emotional coherence even further. Your evolution does not end here. It expands with every insight you are willing to integrate.